So I really think, that messaging from the top is so important. So important.
So let's fire Berman.
I wasn't gonna go there. I knew it was from there. I'm not close enough to really.
Like the.
I will take your word. Yeah.
He's just said some stupid stuff and I just feel if you developed a culture they want to play for, they're gonna play. And the coaching can only help something. Like you have to develop something. Outside of just the game.
Well, in the WIO Sports article, it talked about, the importance of getting better, working hard to get better. And Linder said, and that's especially true. I mean, imagine kids going to Duke in North Carolina and working hard to get better. That's when those guys win national championships.
Dan, while you're working on that, if you wouldn't mind calling roll, please.
Yeah.
Representative Berger,
Here.
Representative Nemec, Representative Overmuller,
Well, I was reading something about with Coach Bowles.
Excuse.
It's not.
Excuse, thank you.
to the NFL and it's not the GPA.
Representative O'Hearn,
Here.
No, most of these kids are
Representative
never gonna play
Pendergraft.
football again.
Here.
Back-
Representative Smith,
graduating athletes.
Representative Stivar is excused, Representative Wiley,
That's-
Chairman Brown.
Here.
Get it? Because
All right. So we have a little bit of music coming in right above us, but we will work through that. We are going to start off, we're going to breeze through or attempt to breeze through 3 bills today. First one up is benefits for spouses of law enforcement members, Senate File 18.
And it is-
Director, you wouldn't mind walking us through the bill? For those that are returning, this was an interim bill. Actually, all 3 of these that we're going to be going through today are interim bills. So we're working pretty heavily during the interim, but Director, if you wouldn't mind walking us through, appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Luke Reiner, Director WYDOT. Mr. Chairman, with me today, Lieutenant Colonel Walther from the Highway Patrol and Mr. Ben Brandis, who's the General Counsel for Wyoming Retirement System. And what I might do is just give a couple introductory remarks, kick it over to Lieutenant Colonel Walther, and then really, because the bill is actually very technical, I'd like to turn it over to the retirement system to walk through the details of the bill. But for those of you who weren't involved in the interim, here's what this bill does. One of the questions that you always ask me, and it's a good question, is what else are you doing for your employees besides pay? This is actually an idea that bubbled up from the field. So we've stood up what we call employee advisory teams, and I meet with them once a month. And it's a chance for us to have two-way comps between the top of our organization and boots on the ground. And one of our troopers who sits on that advisory team came and said, there's 2 law enforcement plans, and you're well aware of that from the bill that came through here about a month ago. But if in the other plan, if I get killed in the line of duty, my spouse gets 62.5% of my pay. In my plan, I get 50%. And it might be better for me to retire because then I sort of lock in where I'm at in terms of a benefit. And so we started looking at that, and indeed there is a key difference between the 2 plans in terms of what you get, what your spouse receives in terms of a line of duty death. If you should have a handout, and I'm not going to spend much time on here, but the 3rd page of the handout is a little chart that really shows, the benefits for spouse killed in the line of duty.
Hold on for you just a sec.
Thank you for trying to be here.
I don't hear the audio anymore. This is not the same one? No.
Mr. Chairman, we just might have had a misfire.
Okay.
So I'll walk you through this.
Okay,
and it's not
that'll work.
essential for you to for you to see that. So basically, and this will set the conditions for what you'll see when Mr. Brandes walks you through the bill. But basically right now, in the law enforcement plan, which is not the plan that the troopers are in, at time of death, your spouse would get 62.5% of your salary. And kids under 18 would get 6% of the pay until they get age 18. Under the warden, patrol, and DCI plan, it's 50% of the salary upon time of death, and the children under 18 get 5% of the benefit. And so that's an example of where we thought, hey, we need to fix this. And so I think without really going into more details, I'll leave those for Mr. Brandes and would just simply say from the director's viewpoint of, we do see this as an important way to take care of our troopers, wardens, and DCI, and to level the playing
I'll go
field
ahead and take over
between.
today. I'm so sorry, everyone. Nigel is out sick, unfortunately, today.
Between the two plans.
So
We're gonna do our best to work through this. We'll see if we can make this happen.
So with that, Mr. Chairman, let me pass it to Lieutenant Colonel.
and
You guys are pretty good
also
ventriloquists.
the
This
whole
is
dimension
impressive. So Lieutenant Colonel, please.
It seems like we
I'm
might
not
be
very good at
waiting
ventriloquist.
on one or two.
Mr. Chairman, Committee, Josh Walter,
today.
Lieutenant Colonel for the Wyoming Highway Patrol. I'll just add a couple
John
things to what the
maybe waiting
director stated.
to get it in.
And maybe
But
since you don't have that chart,
while
just give a
we
couple
am,
examples of
into
what
the
we're
meeting,
looking
I'll
at
go
here
ahead and
in
add
terms of line of duty
Steve
deaths.
in, to kick us.
I don't
off
wanna
with
die.
Wayfinding.
Okay, but
Actually, it looks like
and
it looks
I don't
like
know
he
anyone
is.
on the
He's
highway
jumping
patrol
right
who
in.
does,
So
or any
actually,
fish folks or ward
meeting
folks,
agenda.
or DCI folks.
We'll
But,
start with the
but
conceptual. This is
unfortunately,
great
in today's
presentation of the
climate,
visitor
it's ever
center. So this
increasing
is a
the
concept that we're really excited
the
to share
percentage of
with you
chances
today.
of us
We
losing
really
our
think it's
lives in the
going
line
to
of
be
duty
interactive
are
and very
increasing,
engaging
unfortunately.
For all visitors.
All we're
within the
asking,
visitor
Mr. Chairman and
itself.
committee, is that
So
our
with that, John,
benefits
I
be
will
equal to what the
throw,
large plan is,
the
not
presentation
less.
over to you.
And I'll give you one example that's huge. It kind of paints a perspective here. If I'm a 25-year tenured trooper, and I retire, my benefit's 62.5%. That's what I get to leave with. I get 62.5% of my salary. If I'm 1
So it
month
looks
from
like
my
I'm
retirement
getting a
date and I'm
message saying
killed,
host has
my
disabled
benefit gets
participant
dumped down to
screen sharing.
50%.
I'm not sure.
So
if
my
that's just
family,
me or if
my
it's
benefit now has
other
been
people able to
reduced. So
share.
I essentially lose credit for those years' work, those additional 5 years' work over 20 years, which would have been 50%.
Okay, no worries.
So I'm losing it. So you basically have more incentive to get out earlier, and we don't want that. Want to be able to take care of our spouses and take care of our kids and just do it. We don't want to be better. We don't want our
with the
benefit to be
visitors
better than the other plan. We
specifically.
just want it to be equal, and here's why.
John, certainly not to steal your thunder.
You know,
but
folks, right
we'll be
now, we're all
presenting
drawn from
a
the same
series of
pond, the
stations
same pool
throughout the
nationwide.
visitor center that
Folks
we
who are
really
interested
think
and
will
want to
do a
work in
wonderful
law
job of
enforcement
communicating the
are becoming more
importance
and more
of
limited.
all of the different branches.
So what we want to be able to do is attract and retain folks. So we don't want to not have somebody join our agency because they look at the benefits and the salary and the entire package from another agency and realize that they're better. So again, it's not to be better, it's to be the same. The way this bill is written, I think covers that. It takes care of it. I don't think there's any changes recommended to it, and I think it clears up any of the concerns and issues that we had. I'll look at that chart real quick. I thought there was one other thing I wanted to point out to you. That's it. It was the thing that the director had mentioned already with the percentage for the kids per year. This brings that up equal to their plan two, which is 6% until they're age 18. So aside from that, I would stand for any questions before if the chairman would allow us to turn it over to Mr. Brandes.
Any questions for YDOT and or the Highway Patrol, which is housed underneath YDOT, before we move it over to the retirement system? Seeing none. Mr. Brandes, welcome to our committee. We don't get to see you very often.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The director and the colonel did a good job describing, I think, the purpose of this legislation. The Wyoming Retirement System administers 7 pension plans for paid public employees, 2 of which are devoted to law enforcement officers. And in those 2 plans, one, the warden and patrol DCI plan, the other being for local law enforcement officers and police. There is a bit of an inequity in these pre-retirement death benefits, and that's what's trying to be resolved here. So I'll begin walking through the bill, Mr. Chairman. Beginning on page 2 of the bill, line 8. This again is in the statutes related to the law enforcement plan for local law enforcement. Beginning on line 8 is where the description of the in the scope of employment pre-retirement death benefit is articulated. This is the standard, the existing standard. This language in this statute is cleanup language again to equate it to the changes that are being made in the other plan. This again describing that in the scope of employment death benefit shall be paid out at 62.5% of salary. And the other language here allows for the greater of either the salary at the time of death or the highest average salary of the officer, whichever is greater.
Just a second. Vice Chair O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is just making sure both of them are the same. And why were there inequalities when they were both originally put together, please?
Mr.
Mr.
Brandis.
Chairman, Representative O'Hearn, the inequities exist basically because the plans were created at different times. The law enforcement plan, again, the statute that we're reading now was created when the law enforcement plan was created in 2004, I believe. The Warrant and Patrol plan predates that plan. There were discussions at the time, my understanding is, by the legislature about, how to structure the new law enforcement plan. And those discussions resulted in the benefits that you see here articulated. And those weren't then converted to the pre-existing Warrant and Patrol plan at that time.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So all the changes we're making, just make them same.
Mr.
Mr.
Brandis.
Chairman, Representative, yes, that's correct. This is just equating for, again, pre-retirement death benefits in both plans to be equal.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead and continue, Mr. Brandis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to line 18 on page 2, this then begins, again, cleaning up the language in this statute to describe the outside of the scope of employment death benefit which will remain at 50% compared to the 62.5% awarded in the previous section. Moving on to page 3. This provision, beginning on line 11, articulates the 6% that the director referred to that is payable to minor children under the age of 18 until they reach the age of majority. Beginning on line 15 of page 3, this is the beginning of the description of the salary that's to be applied to award the benefit, what percentage of what salary. And again, we have multiple ways in the statute of determining what salary is payable for a retirement or death or disability benefit. One way is described on line 19, which is the highest average salary, which is how regular retirements are calculated. In this plan, it's the highest 5 years of salary for the officer. And the bill would propose to give the higher of either that highest average salary, or on page 4, line 1, describes the final actual salary of the officer at the time of death, whichever is higher. Beginning on,
Just
yes,
out of curiosity, how often does that happen? It would seem to me that it would be more often than not that it would be the highest salary would be what their current salary is. So it just seems a little strange that we would have the higher salary. Is this in case they retired and came back? Or I guess I'm trying to figure out why we wouldn't just have a straight final salary.
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I don't have the actual numbers about how often it may be that one may be higher than the other. I think that you're right. That almost always it's going to be final actual salary, particularly because we're talking about pre-retirement death benefits. Certainly someone who hasn't amassed enough service credit even to reach that highest average salary. But in cases of maybe there's longevity that may result in an instance in which someone's highest average salary would be higher than actual salary at the time. Mr. Chairman, moving on with the bill on page 4, line 5, we switch to the statutes applicable to the Warden and Patrol Plan. 9-3-613. Again, the changes made here in these provisions are designed to equate to the language that we just went through in the law enforcement plan, creating in the scope of employment, pre-retirement death benefit of 62.5%. In provision A, beginning on line 7, provision B articulates the 6% awarded to minor children, as we discussed before. And then similarly on page 5, there's a description again of salary and definition of salary. I should note, Mr. Chairman, there are statutory definitions of salary in each plan, and the proposed changes here are designed to reference each of those specific definitions. I think, Mr. Chairman, that is the extent of the specifics of the bill. I'm happy to address any other amendments or changes that you would like me to in the actual bill draft.
Okay, committee, any questions for Mr. Brandis on this? As the draft is written, it does look like it's the majority of this is conforming language, just going back and forth between the two statutes, but committee, any questions? Seeing none.
Mr. Chairman, I may just add one last, we have evaluated the actuarial impact on these plans. For the law enforcement plan, the changes that are being proposed really have minimal to no impact. In the Warden and Patrol plan, there is again a very minimal actuarial impact. It's about $90,000. But to remind the committee, it's an $170 million plan. That's a pretty minimal impact. So I wanted to convey that.
Yes, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But it will be a big impact for those families who, for a fallen soldier's family or fallen officer's families, correct?
Mr. Brandis.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, this is, certainly, given that there was this inequality between the two plans for our law enforcement officers across both plans, this certainly, equates those benefits for those spouses.
Mr. Brandis, my only question, and it's actually more probably of just a call out that if you can get me some information, I'm struggling to find any way. I think the longevity would be about the only way, but I'm struggling to find a way that we would have a higher average salary than their last salary. And not so much that I want to, oh, beautiful. Lieutenant Colonel.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No.
I was thinking of an example when he was saying that. Once you get to a level in the highway patrol of a captain, you're no longer, you can't accrue overtime anymore. You don't get overtime payout. You're exempt. So as folks go up through the chain, a lot of lieutenants, because they're working the overtime and get paid for it, make more money than a captain, although the captains are working overtime too. So typically a captain makes less money than a lieutenant. If they retire as a captain, they'll go back to when they were a lieutenant. And those are the highest years.
That is exactly what I needed. Thank you.
One other quick thing to point out too was regarding the final actual salary. It's the same thing there. It's not uncommon to have their very last month be a lower pay than what they made 3 years ago. So same thing, different example, but
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Lieutenant sitting back here, you hear that then, right? You just want to stay where
He's
you're at. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I may just follow on that just for clarification. It did occur to me, the way that final actual salary can be calculated, it may depend on, if there's unpaid leave or something in either the month that the death occurs or in the previous 12 months, how that gets calculated. There are other factors that could reduce that calculation on our end,
Excellent.
and that would take care of that.
That helps tremendously, gentlemen. Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, gentlemen. Much appreciated. Do we have anybody from any other agency? Please. Please introduce yourself.
Chairman Brown, committee members, my name is Dan Shen. I'm the director for the Department of Corrections. And I certainly understand what I believe to be the need for coexisting and being collaborative with the retirements. I certainly understand the need, but I also, there's just a small portion of the bill, if you notice, it goes from $60 to 6% for the children. That would also affect the law enforcement. And to me, it's a benefit that I pray each night that we never have to use, but it would also benefits 568 correctional officers as well as 123 parole agents in our state as well. Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for correction.
Director Shannon, those numbers were 568 correctional officers, and what was the parole officers?
123, Mr. Chairman.
23 parole. Thank you. Any questions for Director Shannon? Thank you so much for being here. We know you're incredibly busy as well, so
Thank you,
thank
sir.
you. Any other agencies and or governor's office? Seeing none. We have anybody online? Okay. Anybody in the public? Betty Jo? Not so much, huh? All right, Bill, come on up.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. Couple of thoughts for you. The military shifted from the last day's pay methodology to high 3 years calculation back in the early 80s. That was frankly a cost-saving measure for the Congress. That way they actually use that average of the high 3 as a means of lowering the retirement benefit. That's not what you're doing here. Partly that comes about because it's common for at the federal level for there to be a cost of living adjustment every year, so that last day pay would be higher than your high 3 under that kind of regime. You have a different way of doing that. So, and plus the issue of overtime makes a difference, but I'd offer you to keep your eye on the ball there so that it doesn't some years out end up inverting on you. In the military, they have a dependency and indemnity compensation that is paid to a spouse for death of an active duty service member, and it's a lump sum single payment check. I mentioned this when this bill was in the other body. But the purpose of that is that, getting the pay will stop. The pay guys are very good at stopping pay. Boom, they know you're dead, man. They turn the switch and it's gone. But you got checking accounts, you got automatic things that you pay out of a checking account and things like that. And sometimes it takes a while to start up with the insurance that you're going to get. Now, the comment that was made when I spoke about this before was, well, we have it set up and we get the money there in 30 days and that should be okay. And everybody was comfortable with that. But I'd ask you to file the thought away, because when a member on active duty, or in if you call it active duty for the troopers, for instance, to make sure that they have sufficient cash to keep things moving is important. And so you might think about that. The other thing you have in the military system is term life insurance, which is wonderful. It's several $100,000, but it goes away the day you retire. And so you have to put in money for life insurance so that when that goes away, when you retire, you have insurance for that portion of your life. And so you might just tuck that thought away too, for how you do things with your law enforcement folks. Subject to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitney. Any questions? All right. Seeing no further public testimony, we're going to go ahead and close that up and button this bill up. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Wiley, seconded by Nemec. I almost did it again. By the end of session, I will not even begin to flinch at that. Committee, any changes to the bill? Again, we're not going to run through these page by page any longer. So if you have any amendments, let me know of them now. Question being called. Diana, would you please call roll?
Okay, Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Nemec,
Aye.
Representative Obermuller,
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft,
Aye.
Representative Smith,
Aye.
Representative Stivar has submitted an absentee vote of aye. Representative Wiley,
Aye.
Chairman Brown.
Aye.
That's 9 ayes.
Any volunteers for this one? Okay, we'll go ahead and do Vice Chair O'Hearn will carry this one. All right, next file up for us, guys, is Senate File 19, and I believe we have some more YDOT troopers ready to go on this one. Is that correct? It's kind of fun when I actually get a whole bunch of constituents that get to testify in this committee. It's kind of fun. Betty Jo, are you leaving us? All right. Thanks for joining. All right. Lieutenant Colonel, Lieutenant, floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman Committee, thank you again, Josh Walter, Lieutenant Colonel for the Wyoming Highway Patrol. We have our resident expert here with the Wyoming Highway Patrol, or one of them in child restraint. So I'm just going to say a couple quick things before we turn it over to him, and you'll quickly realize why he's our resident expert. But this bill, so we have guiding principles in Wyoming Highway Patrol. One of them, safety first, and the second's helping people. And so anytime we can check off a couple of those boxes, we have 5 guiding principles, those are the top 2. Anytime we can check off a couple of those boxes, we try to, and this bill does exactly that. This isn't about penalties, fines, about income for the state or any of that stuff. It's about protecting people, and specifically protecting kiddos who can't do it themselves. We sort of have a motto in Wyoming where, it's somewhat irrelevant what other states are doing. We like to do things our own way, but this is one of those where there's so much support and so much research done nationwide that we need to pay attention. There are more and more states jumping on every year with this Turn It To requirement, and we don't have it in law. It's been since 2005, I believe, since we've addressed this, and there's been so many changes and advances since then. So it's something we need to take a serious look at. The bill puts safety first, again, for people who can't make choices themselves. And as Lieutenant Reagan will get into here, really there's a lot of research showing that rear facing up until even the ages of 3 and 4 is what's really recommended. So we're just trying to take the first step toward that, and at least have legislation that says, let's not turn until we're 2 or until the manufacturers of the car seats say it's safer to turn it to. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if I may, turn it over to Lieutenant Reagan.
Lieutenant Reagan, please.
Mr. Chairman, committee, for the record, my name is Dustin Reagan. I'm a lieutenant with the Highway Patrol. I'm also one of our instructors for state child passenger safety. I teach for the Highway Patrol, also for all of NHTSA classes across the state for any agency that requests them. I appreciate you being here today, and I really appreciate this bill being up for talking about it. It's a combination bill. I mean, it really brings together all of the recommendations from NHTSA, so the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, as well as the American Academy of Pediatrics. Back in 2018, they updated the last review and recommendation, and that's when they recommended, at a minimum, we wanted to have children rear facing till at least 2 years old, or until they outgrow the upper weight limits or height of their seat. Since that time, numerous states have jumped on board to try to start passing those laws. As of today, we're up to 23 states, including DC, that have passed some sort of law that is a Turn It To. Some of them have exceeded that because if you'll notice on this very first page of the handouts that I believe you all received today, this infographic, through all the testing and research, they found out that from birth till about 4 is where children really recommend staying rear facing. And if anybody has children or sees children, you know that when they're first born, they're not proportionate at all. Their heads, their neck, they don't have control. And this is the reason that they want them rear facing as long as possible, because in a rear facing child seat, the entire shell of the seat protects them in the event of a crash. Or like we say in our training, it doesn't even have to be a crash. Because in Wyoming, how many times do we have deer, elk, anything run out in front of you, and then you slam on your brakes? Just even those forces of you slamming on your brakes, having that rear shell protects that child. If they're forward facing, they now have a lot more excursion of their head, neck, and extremities to where they can have potential injuries, even though you weren't even involved in a crash. So that's why we're here today. Our Wyoming law has not been updated or changed since 2005. And with any technology, stuff changes. Our seats today, since when I started teaching, 13 years ago, is completely different than what it was at that time. And then now you start talking about our child seat law as well. A lot has changed in these, 18 years of time since we've updated our child seat law. So that's why we're here today. If you go to the second page, We wanted to make sure that we also correlated this not just to national standards, but we wanted to bring it into Wyoming, okay? So I went through highway safety and I worked with them to evaluate 10 years of crash data that we have from our crash reporting system. We had 10 children between the ages of 1 and 3 that passed away in car crashes in our state. And while that doesn't seem like a lot, any loss of life on our highways is too much, especially when you're talking about kids. When you also look at it in the view of an iceberg, you want to start talking about injuries as well. But just for those fatalities, if you evaluate it to look at how they were positioned in the car, 6 of those children were already moved forward facing. So between the 1 and 3 year range, 60% of those fatalities could have potentially either survived or had less injuries, depending on the crash dynamics and stuff like that. That is a very large percentage that we could potentially impact and improve the safety of. So then when we start looking at injuries, we wanted to pull the same amount of data. So we pulled the same 10 years of that time frame, just looking at the 1-year-olds. So that's like the target of when they typically get moved from rear facing to forward facing. We had 136 injuries and crashes, and 53.5% were already out of the rear facing and moved to forward facing. So a large portion of even those injured children could have potentially had no injuries or less injuries by keeping them rear facing on that target age group. Between 1 and 3, they can sustain a lot better in rear facing because we already talked about it. The shell helps protect them. It helps protect that excursion from their head and their neck. And then when we teach it in our classes, safety actually decreases when you advance through child seats and into a seatbelt. So honestly, a seatbelt for even us as adults is the least safe thing in a vehicle. A child in a rear facing seat is much safer than we are as a driver in a seatbelt. So as they progress, their safety actually decreases. But the reason they do that is because they're hoping that their bodies are growing into it, their bones are becoming stronger, and they can have a little bit more excursion and less susceptibility to serious injuries. So if we can target those really young ones and try to keep them in that rear facing position for a longer period of time, that's where we can have the greatest impact for our highways and for our kiddos on our highways. We do have a lot of changing technology in car seats. They have what's called convertible and all-in-one seats. So you can buy one seat at a lower age and you can keep it for a much longer period of time now. So even the car seat manufacturers have all jumped on board with these recommendations where they allow for the children to remain rear facing for a much longer period of time. So like the burden to a parent or something would be pretty minimal, if at all, due to the seats on the market already are built for these recommendations based on NHTSA and the Academy of Pediatrics. Like I stated earlier, we already have 23 states plus DC that have done some sort of a turn it to law. Several states have exceeded that, but we want to just go to that minimum. On that infographic, it said anywhere between 2 and 4, but we want to, even on the low end, just to get that really good percentage increase for our own people, trying to go to that 2 would have a great impact for Wyoming. 9 states have already passed this. We were able to get a bill drafted in the 21 session. We've been working on this for approximately 4 years, so we're really happy to be here, and we're hoping that we can jump on board with these states as well. So that's why we're requesting to add the language down at the bottom of slide 2, just add the language of keeping them rear facing until the child reaches the age of 2 or the weight and height limit specified by the child seat manufacturer. And then just to follow it up before questions, we have been working on this with a lot of different entities, including our own Wyoming Academy of Pediatrics. And the third slide has a letter from Dr. Rose, who is our chapter president here in Wyoming. He's a great supporter. We've been working with him on this for several years. And so he wanted to just type up a letter of support, showing kind of some of the background and even emphasize in one of his little bullets that research has proven 90% reduction in significant injuries when children under 4 are still rear facing compared to no restraint. So in Wyoming, we have a very large child seat problem, and this is one of the small steps that we can make to really help battle that and keep our kids safe on our highways. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Any questions for the Lieutenant? Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may have a couple of questions here. Mostly this is just for my own edification. Excuse me, I'm from the day when Mom's Arm was our security system. It was much better. I'm looking specifically at page 2, and I see the words, I always look for the words may and shall. In line 10, the child may be properly secured I'm just questioning why that terminology is that way. Probably in context, it makes more sense.
So just as a, so the lieutenant has a few seconds to look this up. That is existing language in statute. So I recognize what you're saying there, but
Right.
they're probably more versed in what the changes are. So we'll give them just a second to take a
Okay.
look at that.
And then the second question has to do with airbags. I know a lot of systems have an airbag that you can turn off or turn on. Some of them are on and off by how much weight is in the seat. Is there anything that your department is doing to educate people about the dangers of that, putting a seat in front of an airbag? Thank you.
And Representative, actually, I can answer the question. I'm sure Lieutenant Reagan would like to answer it as well. But to answer your question about the child may be properly secured, that is in a vehicle only equipped with one row of seats. The child may be secured in a child safety restraint system in the front passenger seat. So it's saying that they can be put in there. It's just so, and then if you continue reading the rest of that, they shall not be placed in the front of an active airbag.
Right. I get that, which is why I said perhaps in context.
Yep, absolutely. Lieutenant, anything further to add?
Chairman, no, I was just gonna say the same thing. It's either if there's no seat available in the back or the back is already occupied, there is that exemption to where they may be. And then if further past that, it's talking about rear facing in front of active airbags, because the way crash forces are made, if you have a frontal airbag and a rear facing seat, the airbag hits the seat and actually compromises the safety of that rear seat. And as for our education that we do for that, we do a lot of education and outreach with all of our child passenger safety technicians. It's a collaboration between our agency, fire departments, hospitals, police departments, everything, to where we do a lot of this outreach to make sure that everybody knows about the dangers of those rear facing in front of airbags.
Sure. Representative Pendergraft.
Last question very quickly. Is there somewhere else in statute, some sort of punitive statute so that an operator could be cited for failure to abide by this?
Chairman.
Lieutenant.
Representative, yes, it's a subsequent statute that does have the penalty associated to it. This is a stacking statute, I guess. The first offense is less than the second offense. So the first offense offers a out as well, because if they have proof that they go purchase a seat, then they can actually get that first one waived. But then if they ever get caught with a secondary offense, then the fine almost doubles. But today we're not trying to increase any penalties or do anything. We're leaving the penalties the same. We just want to try to get that critical age group to try to keep them safer on our highways.
Representative, if you also notice the discussion about 2021 House Bill 23, it's exactly why that bill died. Just being on that committee and working through that. The original discussion was to try to take that to a $200 fine from a $100 fine, and it failed by, I think, 4 or 5 votes, if I remember correctly. So Representative Smith.
All righty, what about, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What about people traveling out of state that are not part of the 23 other states that have adopted this and they're just passing through our state?
Lieutenant.
Mr. Chairman, Representative. So Wyoming is actually one of the, we used to be one of the most strict child passenger safety laws in this country, along with Tennessee. So we already get that a lot because we're a boost till 9 state. So which means we require a child to be in a booster until they've reached their 9th birthday. And a lot of our other states, including border states, are much lower than that. So we've trained our troopers and officers, one, that we need to use somewhat of common sense, but then also have some empathy with people. Like personally, what I usually do is I question them on their own state law. If they don't know their own state law, then I will go back to my car and Google it to see what it actually is and see if it correlates. And then I'll take enforcement action or educational action based on our conversation at that point. But our law does allow for enforcement of travelers through our state, just like it does currently under our existing law.
Anything further? Okay. Any further questions for the lieutenant or lieutenant colonel? So my only question on this, Lieutenant, is really, I guess, and I use the term enforcement, but that's kind of a loose term. I don't want to use it as in the punitive damages are along this line. How do you determine, or do your troopers determine when something like this occurs, that if I'm trying to think of my grandchildren, right? My grandchildren are in their seats and I've got one of them already turned into a front facing, the other one's in the rear facing. But he's a fat little dude and he's also very long. So he's outgrowing, but he is not 2 years old yet. And so how would the trooper know that if I've moved them into that, but they're not 2 years old, how would they know whether or not I've moved them into this new seat because he's outgrown his current car seat? I guess I'm trying to think the polar opposite of what you guys are trying to look at, that there's that potential out there. So I'm trying to think how this would go out on the road.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
so we want this, number one, to be educational and informative. So we want to be able to not only say, hey, this is the best practices, this is what the recommendations are from NHTSA and AAP, but we want to also say, we also have law behind it to make sure. So even if we can target and get a lot of the willful compliance, that right there is going to attack a lot of what we want to do. When it comes to the roadside part of it, and we're making a contact, a lot of it comes to the questioning and answering. Okay. So we would look, one, we'd hopefully have eyes on that child and seeing that they are a larger child. And then we'd ask them their age and stuff and have that conversation. And then if we start talking to them and we find out the reasoning behind it, or if, yeah, they were rear facing, but their head was just too high on the shell and things like that.
Yep.
That's when, and that's why we want that secondary piece of the law that says, or when you've reached some height or weight limits of that seat. So then we can, through the conversation of that parent, and if the head is at the top of the shell, we know, yep, and then you took the proper steps and you moved that child forward facing, because if you kept them any longer in the rear facing, that could have compromised their safety. So it's going to be a lot of conversation, but it's also going to be a lot of education.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And back on your point of education, how can we do that better in our communities? How can you guys do that better? How do we get better when we educate, especially on safety of our children on these roads?
Lieutenant Reagan.
Mr. Chairman, Representative. So we can all get better, obviously. We do a lot more outreach. We're doing more YouTube type videos and stuff. I've been in a couple of them, unfortunately. And so we can try to outsource that to other people. So we were trying to get our troopers. I mean, we went through a lull, but in the last 2 years, I believe, we've now made it mandatory. So every trooper that comes through our patrol academy gets taught our full NHTSA technician course. So anytime you see those commissioned troopers on the little pictures and stuff, they've all coming out as technicians. So their education and their awareness and informative level is much higher than it used to be, because we didn't used to train that in the academy. So now we're increasing our resources statewide to where they can go, and they're doing child seat events. They're reaching out at elementary schools. We're going to daycares and stuff like that, to where we're trying to talk about these events and talk about these safety measures so that we can get it out there a little more.
Representative. Oh, yes, follow up.
So again, just make it clear. So is it Lieutenant Brad Pitt, Tom
Reagan.
Cruise?
No.
Oh, never mind.
Well, they used to have the trunk trooper, so now we're just going to have the safety restraint troopers. So, right?
Like that.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One quick question. Do you know approximately the percentage that troopers choose to do an education component on a stop as opposed to a citation?
Lieutenant Reagan.
Chairman, Representative, I don't have those stats. I can tell you from the ones that I've been involved in, or the people that I've worked alongside, the vast majority of them do take more of an educational approach to it. We try to use citations as a last ditch effort. To give you an example, during a class when we weren't having enough people come to our event to get our people certified, because they have to have so many installs to get certified, when we went out and we were looking for traffic stops to bring them to our event, we actually had a person that just demanded to get a ticket rather than deal with our spiel and have their child seat and their child looked at. So those things kind of weigh the numbers, but they are out there. But we like to try to take that progressive educational approach, because ultimately our goal is to just have that child leave safer than they arrived.
Okay. Any further questions? Lieutenant, thank you very much. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you. Any other agencies? I don't see anybody else out here besides YDOT, so nobody online. Any public comment? Okay, we'll close this back, bring it back to the dais. Committee, what's your pleasure? All right, moved by Berger, again by Nemec. Okay. Committee, any changes that you guys see on this bill? Pretty tough bill.
Question.
Question being called. Diana, would you please call roll?
Okay, Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Nemec,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Pendergraph,
Aye.
Representative Smith,
No.
Representative Stivar has submitted an absentee vote of aye. Representative Wiley,
Aye.
Chairman Brown.
Aye.
That's 8 ayes and 1 no.
Representative Nemec, would you mind carrying this one? Thank you, sir. All right, breezing right on through. I'm not near as good as my vice chairman. We would have been out of here by now if we were. But we will finish this off with House Bill 20, or I'm sorry, Senate File 20. And we're gonna get the last little bit of whiteout in here. You got everybody out here today. I appreciate that, Director. Thank you. Misty, please introduce yourself and the floor is yours.
Chairman Brown, members of the committee, my name is Misty Zimmerman. I am the Driver Services Program Manager. Today we have in front of you Senate File 20, and the title of it is Driver's License ID and Photo Quality, and that is the exact issue we are trying to deal with here. So some of you may remember working this through the interim. We did provide you with a brief handout. I'm not going to go through that information page by page, just because I think there's a lot of information in there, and I think we can wrap this up pretty quickly here with just a quick summary. So 317117 describes what our requirements are on our driver's license and identification, well, specifically driver's license here in this chapter. And so what we've asked is part of that requirement exists today is that it is a true color photo. Back in 2018, we started the development of our new driver's license, which is the driver's license that has been issued beginning in November of 2019. That card is based on the standards that is set out by the association that all jurisdictions belong to, which is AMVA, the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators. And they set up design standards that are widely used across the states. And in fact, most jurisdictions do go by those standards. Those standards specifically state in there that the front of the card should have a true color photo unless engraved by the laser engraved printer. So in 2019, when we moved to this polycarbonate card, it is constructed very differently than our previous card. The previous card was PVC, which you can basically buy a whole sleeve of them and get your inkjet printer out and start printing. We have seen multiple false documents that we've seen. In fact, some of the counterfeiters believe that the back image, if you shine the UV light on Devil's Tower, that they believe it looks like the Liberty Bell. And so we've seen some of those come through. This card that we have today is a much more secure card. It is a polycarbonate card, which only allows for that laser engraved printing, which actually brings black ink out of the substrate. It doesn't actually print on the card. And so that's why we are asking today for the removal of the color in our both driver's license and identification statute, so that as technology allows, we can choose as an agency the best representation for our citizens. There's a couple different pictures in that handout that I gave you. I think the one on the page with the states listed at the top, that is the same photo reproduced in 2 different instances. So you see the varying degrees of issues that we're dealing with this process. So there was one amendment on the House side, Chairman Brown brought that. And so that does allow us to promulgate rules and regs for carrying out this statute. And we have already started working on that to address some concerns about whether or not we would like to bring color back, and then some additional concerns about some medical variances and things like that Chairman Brown brought up. With that, I stand for questions.
Committee, any questions? We've received quite a few emails on this, so I'm going to suspect that we've got some questions out of this. Vice Chair O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned the forgery. Is this easier or harder to forge? Basically in the black and the white.
Mr. Chairman, let me just clarify your question. Will it be easier to forge with black and white or color, or is it easier to forge than our previous card?
Go ahead.
We got, like the chairman said, I've gotten 115 emails saying we need to have this in color so I can look at the thing, and when Misty comes in, I can prove that her eyes are blue and her hair is red, and she's 5'7" and whatever.
Right.
Ms. Zimmerman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ahern. I do not think that the difference in the color photo versus the black and white photo would give any difference in the ability to counterfeit this card. This card is very difficult to reproduce. In fact, since we've been doing this since November of 2019, our vendor has not identified any cards that have been reproduced. And it's not because of the color photo. It's more because of the quality of the substrate and how difficult it is to manipulate. So you can't scrape that color off. You can't change things like your demographic information, like your height, your weight, those types of things. Because as you start to manipulate that data, it actually destroys the card versus a polycarbonate card, which can be easily scraped off and reprinted, or excuse me, a PVC card.
Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have my driver's license out and I'm looking at it and it's supposedly in color. It doesn't look like, it kind of looks like me and I've always had, but green eyes, but I don't see green in my eyes or anything, you know, right there. I do see my black hair, but that's just black. I can't see much of the gray, silver in my beard. But yeah, and the quality, when I first got this, I was kind of like, that we had a better quality back in the day. So what I'm looking at on the other side is quality, and then also not being able to again counterfeit. Correct,
Representative or Mr. Chairman, Representative, you are exactly correct. We feel that this change will bring a better, more clear photo to our constituents, because you are right, exactly we've heard those complaints from many other people. It's difficult to determine even noses or shapes. The polycarbonate card, our vendor worked very hard to try and make the color photo work according to our statute. In fact, they moved our production facility from Atlanta, Georgia to Chanhassen, Minnesota, which is where the printer is, 3 miles away, the printer manufacturer. And it's just very difficult to calibrate that machine to print exactly the same every single time. The other variables that we do have is lighting in our offices changes how a photo is exposed from one time of the day to the next. And so those are challenges that we have in a lot of our exam stations. And so we just feel like this will produce, we will still capture and store a color photo. We are required to do that, and we will still pass that on to law enforcement, but the credential itself will be the only thing that comes in black and white. And if you look at the Tina sample picture, that's a good representation. Granted, that is our model photo in the color photo. And then the black and white, everything just becomes a little bit more crisp and a little bit more clear when we move to that black and white photo.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I note that looking at this card, it lists sex, height, weight, and the color of the eyes. So if you couldn't detect the color of the eyes in a black and white picture, it's telling you what to look for. But I don't see anything about hair. Is that because hair is now subject to the whims of the moment? In my mind, they used to say what the natural hair color was. Thank you.
Ms. Zimmerman.
Chairman Brown, Representative, we actually collect your hair color. We ask for your natural hair color. And if you flip the back of that card over, if you look at it, there's a barcode on the back called PDF 417. And as we were developing this, at the request of law enforcement, we actually included that hair color on the backside in the data. It's just not on the face of the card because it's not part of the standard anymore, because I can be blonde one day and redhead one day and purple the next.
Any further questions? Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Seeing nobody else. Senator Boner, you want to come testify on the color bill? You sure? All right. All right. All right, committee, we'll bring it back up here. What's pleasure? Moved by O'Hearn, seconded by, who did I hear down here? Nemec again. All right. We got to get you quicker on the draw. We'll get you to be the one who moves it. All right, committee. I will let the committee know, as Ms. Zimmerman did mention, if you look at Where is it at here?
Authorizing rulemaking?
Yeah, the rulemaking. Oh, I just didn't scroll down far enough. Sorry. That was brought by me over in the Senate hearing. And that was brought to me instead of bringing an entire bill forward. I've had a couple of constituents and one in particular who had cancer and didn't want to have to retake her picture while she didn't have hair. And was kind of frustrated at the whole system at that point, and they made her retake a picture because it had been 8 years. And so bringing this through Ms. Zimmerman and through Taylor as well, giving them the rulemaking authority. There were some additional opportunities that have been presented themselves, such as hairdresses, turbans, those types of things that may be included for religious purposes. That giving them this rulemaking authority allows them to go in and do this a little more. So that was the change that you see in the engrossed copy versus what came over through the interim. So any further discussion?
That brings up a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We still need a full facial, right? I know there was some religious where the women cover their faces. And
You
that
just
was-
thought you
that
were
was
done.
One of the rule.
Ms. Zimmerman, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, actually the compliance of the Real ID requires from the crown of your head to your chin. But we can do with scarves and veils, but they cannot obstruct the full face or create a shadow. And that's where we've seen issues in the past, as well as people wanting to wear something with a bill on it that would create a shadow, and that's not allowable by Real ID.
Thank you.
Representative Pendergraft? No. Okay. All right. Committee,
Question.
question being called. Diana, would you please call roll?
Okay, Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Nemec,
Aye.
Representative Obermuller.
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft,
Aye.
Representative Smith,
No.
Representative Stivar,
No.
Representative Wiley,
Aye.
Chairman Brown.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes and 2 noes do pass.
Thank you, Diana. Representative Wiley, how you feeling? You want to take that one? I'll back clean up for you. All right. With that, committee, we're adjourned. I'm like 5 minutes I went 5 minutes over my original timeline, guys. Sorry.